Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. It is currently 49 degrees, going to be a high of around 64. Sunrise is at 6:37. The sunset is at 6:42. So we're probably about a couple days out from equal amount of daylight, equal amount of night. That equinox is coming. Uh, Yesterday was the first day of fall, and yesterday afternoon, I stopped and took a breath, and I looked around and just saw, I felt the sun on my skin and just said, that's God. That's God. Um, so we're in a study on repentance, and I'm going to take a look at a repentance scenario in the Bible, and we're going to see some steps of repentance. Um, and if you do turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 7, 2 Corinthians chapter 7, and Paul's writing to the church, and he's talking about how he felt when he found out of the church's turn after his first letter. And he's picking up in verse 5. Let's just pick it up in verse 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 5. For even when we came into Macedonia, our bodies had no rest, but we were afflicted at every turn, fighting without and fear within. So he's on mission and he's on the run, and every turn, everywhere he goes, there's fear within his little camp, but in his heart, in their heart. But they're fighting from everywhere they turn. Outside, everything's stacked against him. The Jews are trying to take him out, as well as the Romans, and everywhere he turns, everywhere he goes, there's always an uproar, and it's disconcerting. He's getting down, and then he says in verse 6, but God who comforts the downcast. Isn't that beautiful? If you're down, like, God comforts you. God will comfort you. So, but God who comforts the downcast comforted us by the coming of Titus. Now notice, when God comforts, he'll send somebody. You guys, see, we're so fast to look to our own selves that we fail sometimes to see who God moves or how God has used something or someone else to encourage us. But God comforts us, and if we look, if we look to Him, we'll find that His comfort is all around us. Like I was talking about, like looking around yesterday and just feeling the warmth of the sun and looking around at all the beauty. I was just so comforted, even though that, like, every turn, right, at every turn there's fighting, and not fighting, but like there's just always something coming up, right, every turn. But if you stop and look around, or if you stop and let him, he will comfort you. And in this case, he sent somebody. He sent Titus. And he says, verse 7, not only by his coming, but also by the comfort with which he was comforted by you. So the church, so he brought them news of what was going on in the church. See, as I talk about on Fridays, gathering together and being a church in one body, one mind, one spirit, and the unity in that. And so when a church moves together, okay, when a church moves together, it encourages. And so he was comforted by, so Titus was comforted as well, as he told us. This is verse 7. And so, by the comfort with which he was comforted by you, as he told us of your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoice still the more. So that I rejoice still the more. See, it, Paul Paul is encouraged and comforted that how do you put it? He did not run the race in vain. Okay, he did not run the race in vain. The words that he left had an impact. See, when as a preacher, when you preach, you don't want to be remembered necessarily. It's not about you. It's about the word. Did the word that you spoke, and you should be preaching the scriptures now, have an impact? Did it have an impact? And so, as a preacher, when I was learning to preach and being discipled in it, the Pastor Brian, he said, "You're not here necessarily for everybody, but only one. So if your word only has an impact on one, be encouraged. The Lord moved. He used you. Okay, He used you." And so that impact of the word is the comfort. Okay, is the comfort. That is when your gift is being used for the edification of the church. It's only one. And then I later learned that even if the only one moved is yourself as the preacher. 'Cause see, I'll be up there preaching and I realize sometimes this message is for me. And that's almost every time, actually. The message is for the preacher as well. We when we're preaching, so I've sat in the pews and thought to myself, is this just about me? But I've also sat there preaching and thought to myself, is this just about me? See, it's the impact of the word, right? It's the impact of the word, and that is encouraging. That is comforting. If when you leave somebody the word, there's change, right? There's an impact. Okay, and so as he told us of your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoice still the more. Then he says in verse 8, "For even if I made you grieve with my letter, I do not regret it." So think of if you're discipling somebody or being discipled, and they have to give you a hard saying, and you deserve a hard saying, right? Or you have to give a hard saying to somebody you love, somebody you care about. Sometimes we get this feeling of, I wish I didn't do that, right? I wish I didn't have to do that. Paul says here, even if I made you grieve with my letter, I do not regret it. Sometimes the word has to have an impact, y'all. Sometimes the word has to have an impact. And this is leading somewhere. Okay? So notice he made them grieve, but look, even still, they still longed for him. They still mourned for him. They still had zeal for him. So he had just written this letter, and he got word back that the folks that he wrote the letter that made them grieve still mourned for him, still longed for him, still had zeal for him. Right? That is the heart of somebody who and I'm not talking about Paul, I'm talking about the church here. The fact that he made them grieve and they still loved on him and still had zeal for him and cared about him. That shows the type of heart that we're looking for in somebody that we disciple. That's a strong-hearted person. If you can give them a hard saying and they don't turn froward, right? They don't turn scoffer, right? The Proverbs talks about somebody that scoffs at or scorns, right? They don't turn scorner. That's somebody, when they're reproofed, how do they act, right? How do they act? And in this case, they were reproofed, but they didn't scorn, right? They didn't turn forward. They didn't run away. They ran toward. They ran toward. And that's the heart that we need to have, because when the word, right, we're reproved by the word, and so when the word hits us, what do? Do we scorn? Do we mock God? Do we scoff at God? Do we run away from God? Or do we run to Him with zeal, like this church did? Do we mourn for how we were when we hear the word? What's our heart? So use this moment this devotional this morning to do some introspective of your heart, and when you hear a heart saying, or when the word convicts you, do some introspective, y'all.